This past week, I was sent link by potential theists, so thanks for that, on this recent video posted by Alan Parr, a really popular Protestant fundamentalist on YouTube. And by popular, I don't know, he's got tens of thousands of followers. His latest view here, or his latest video, is called "Why Many Progressive Christians Will Go to Hell." So we're going to take a look just at the beginning of it. I can't sit through a 13-minute video from this gentleman, unfortunately, but I'll give you some comments about the first couple minutes. So let's take a look.
There is a very strong possibility that either you, your church, or people that you know who profess to be Christians are slowly drifting towards a very dangerous brand of Christianity called progressive Christianity, which I believe is demonically influenced. And the sad reality is that many people who are in this quote unquote progressive Christian movement don't even realize it.
First thing you see at the outset here is something very characteristic of fundamentalism is they can't ever just have disagreements with other people. They always have to pit it in a binary worldview framework of light versus darkness, of God versus the devil. And so if you take a stance as a quote unquote progressive Christian over against their fundamentalist stance, then you're the one who's on the side of the demons. And of course, that just completely undermines the ability to have charity, to have an open conversation with other people, because they represent darkness, they represent evil, and you can't broach evil or darkness. So this is the way that he sets up the whole conversation.
What's up, y'all? So check this out. There's a very dangerous brand of Christianity that has emerged on the scene over the past 20 years or so. It's called progressive Christianity. And basically, the premise behind it is that as the world has progressed, as culture has changed, as certain things have gone on in our world that have shifted the culture as it relates to moral issues and things of that nature, then hey, God has progressed in his view of these things, and therefore Christians need to progress as well, because if not, you're one of those Christians that are in the Stone Age, right?
This is crazy what he just said. He just said that the core idea of progressive Christianity is that God's views are always changing. No, that's crazy. People use the word progressive Christianity in all sorts of ways. Is there a person out there who holds a view such as the one that Mr. Parr describes? I don't know, maybe. To say that that is somehow a representative view of progressive Christianity is crazy, okay? Progressive Christians are, for the most part, theists. They are the most part Christian theists who believe God is omniscient. They're not claiming God's views are changing all the time. The point, rather, is that our views are changing all the time. Because as Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13:12, we now see darkly as through a glass, what you should refer to as epistemic humility. We don't see things as they are. We only have our limited perspective. We do not have the view from nowhere. We have our own fallible point of view. We do not have the God's eye point of view of reality. The claim is not that God is always changing. The claim is that we are changing as fallible human beings living in the warp and woof of history as we try to understand God. And in fact, if Mr. Parr knew his church history, he would immediately recognize this as a fundamental principle of the Reformation, which says the Reformation Church, or the true Reformation Church, is always reforming, because the church has never arrived. To arrive, to see things as they are, to have the God's eye point of view, would be to have arrived in the eschaton, in eternity. And if you claim that now, you are falling into the trap of what we call an over-realized eschatology, of thinking that we can have the end now, that we can see things as they are now, to think that we don't have to reform anymore, to think that we don't have to progress anymore. So that is, in fact, one of the perennial dangers of fundamentalism, of people like Alan Parr, that they assume that they see things as they are, that they don't need to progress. And this, of course, is a great danger, Because once you think, I don't need to progress anymore, you are no longer engaging in the kind of careful introspection that Paul, the apostle himself, commends to us. Test yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Continue to reflect critically, to introspect, to look upon yourself as an individual and on the community in which you exist, to see whether you are faithfully living out the gospel. If Mr. Parr were a little bit more intentional about this, perhaps he would make fewer videos about progressive Christians, and he might make more videos about the danger of fundamentalist complicity to things like the MAGA political movement, conspiracy theories like QAnon, uncritical acceptance of nationalism, uncritical acceptance of an unrestrained gun culture, the demonization of refugees and immigrants on the southern border, and so on and so on. If he was a little more introspective, rather than otherizing the enemy as the demonically influenced progressive Christians over there, maybe he could reflect upon himself and his own fundamentalist community and consider where they may in fact be the ones that are in need of reformation and in need of progression.
So, for instance, Christians should be able to be homosexual and serve in ministry positions as pastors and be leaders and be ordained. And they should be able to marry whoever they want to be married to. And they should be able to do whatever they want to do with their bodies and things of this nature. This is just one of the many signs that lets you know that when your church or people that you know, or even maybe yourself watching this video, you're starting to embrace these things because you're progressing along with the culture.
Okay, I think this is as much as I can take of this gentleman's video, but I am going to conclude here with some additional comments. So he's setting up here a framework for essentially this is an example of foundational indoctrination of his audience. He's given simple binary categories between light and darkness. He's falsely defined what progressive Christianity is in a gross straw man. And then he says, if you see that, you know it's demonic. And so you have to avoid this demonic thing, which is progressive Christianity. And then he gives all these trigger warnings. So if you see anybody in your church who is pro-choice, or if you see anybody in your church who's taking an inclusive stance on same-sex relationships or anything else, you know that that person is influenced by the demonic trajectory of progressive Christianity, and you need to protect yourself against that person. And that is a way of shutting down critical reflection on those very issues. It's a way of undermining the ability to ask questions as to why a particular person adopts a particular stance on abortion or same-sex relationships or any other position. And instead, this trigger warning where the defenses go up because you've already been told by Alan Parr that this is evil. And so now you're going to protect yourself. And again, the one thing that comes through in blinding fashion is the lack of critical introspection from fundamentalists like Alan Parr, that there's, for one thing, I should just add to the lack of critical introspection, in particular, the lack of historical awareness, which I alluded to earlier by his apparent ignorance of the Reformation principle that the Reformation Church is always reforming. But along with that, so the lack of awareness that the particular view of the Bible and of ethics and morality that Mr. Parr currently holds, like there's no awareness, it seems, of the fact that that is just not a timeless manifestation of God's will. That is your understanding as a fundamentalist Protestant in the early 20th century from North America as to what Christianity is and what the right life lived is and what the good and the right are, etc. There's no awareness of that. And because there's no awareness of that, there's also no awareness of how he could be falling into the same traps that people have fallen into in the past. So, for example, back in the 1950s, it was widespread within Protestant Christianity to defend, in the American South particularly, to defend segregationist readings of the Bible. And of course, a century earlier, pro-slavery readings of the Bible were common. People in the 1950s commonly just assumed the Bible supported the separation of the races. And to them, that reading of the Bible was the most natural thing in the world. Just as in an earlier time, a pro-slavery reading of the Bible was just the most natural thing in the world. Today, we don't even consider those possibilities as live options on our hermeneutical horizons. But that's in large part because we are products of our sociocultural time and place. This is not a basis, by the way, for relativism. It is a basis to recognize epistemic humility. Again, we don't see everything timelessly as it is. We don't have the God's eye point of view. Because we have a limited, fallible human perspective, we need to recognize it as such. So I thought I would end my little video with some reflections, because I don't think often that fundamentalists today appreciate just how much historical conditioning has gone into our understanding of Christianity. Just consider how common it was in the 1950s for Christians in the South, for good Bible-believing Protestants who believe God never changed his mind, how common it was for them to think that the separation of races was appropriate and that there was the white race was the supreme race. How many defenses, confident, biblical, grounded defenses of segregation can you find throughout the history of Protestant fundamentalist Christianity? How often people boldly held up their signs, "We do not welcome the colored," because they believed that they had God's point of view. They didn't need to progress. It was those liberals who were progressing with their quote unquote civil rights movement, wanting to quote unquote integrate the races. Consider a school like Bob Jones University, of course, a famously racist school, prohibited interracial dating on campus. Here's a question for you. When did Bob Jones University lift its prohibition on interracial dating? When do you think that happened? It happened in the year 2000, 23 years ago. Here you can read Christianity Today. Bob Jones University drops interracial dating ban. Oh, but I thought that God's views never change, right? I thought that that's once for all, that we figured it all out. We don't need to progress. That's the whole problem with this fundamentalist screed that people like Alan Parr are posing: a complete lack of historical awareness, lack of epistemic humility, lack of critical self-introspection, invocation of binary categories in which you demonize the enemy and undermine your ability both to converse with the neighbor who you made into an enemy, and also, again, to critically introspect your own life, your own community, your own theology and practice. That is a dangerous avenue to be on. And that's the kind of stuff that gets perpetuated by videos like that posted by Alan Parr.